In 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire officially fell. History books tell you it was the barbarians. Germanic tribes overrunning the borders. Invasions that Rome couldn't stop. But that's not what killed Rome. The barbarians didn't destroy the empire. They just picked up the pieces after Rome destroyed itself. Here's what actually happened: Rome's currency collapsed. The denarius, a silver coin that had been trusted for centuries across 3 continents, was debased into worthlessness. By the time the empire fell, the currency contained 5% of its original silver content. 95% worthless metal with a thin silver coating. When your money becomes worthless, you can't pay your armies. You can't fund your administration. You can't maintain your infrastructure. Everything built on that currency collapses. This wasn't caused by foreign invasion. Rome's borders were still defended. This wasn't caused by plague or natural disaster. This was self-inflicted economic suicide. Rome proved a pattern that has repeated in every empire since: military overextension, unsustainable spending, currency debasement, inflation, loss of confidence, collapse. And right now, the United States is following that exact same pattern, step by step, warning sign by warning sign. The only question is how far along we are. To understand how Rome destroyed itself, you need to understand what the denarius was at its peak. Introduced around 211 BC, the denarius was a silver coin containing about 4.5 grams of pure silver. For centuries, it held its value because the Roman government maintained its purity. When you received a denarius, you knew exactly what you were getting: pure silver, real value. This created trust. And trust allowed Rome to fund its expansion, pay its soldiers, and build infrastructure that still stands today. At its peak, Rome controlled 60 million people across 3 continents: Europe, North Africa, the Middle East. Its military was unmatched. Its roads connected an empire larger than any before it. And the denarius was the foundation of it all, accepted everywhere from Britain to Egypt. Roman soldiers were paid in denarii. Taxes were collected in denarii. Trade across the empire was conducted in denarii. The currency was the empire's lifeblood. But empires are expensive. Every generation, Rome's borders expanded. Every expansion required more soldiers, more forts, more roads, more administration. And eventually, more money than Rome actually had. So they did what every empire does when it spends more than it earns: they debased the currency. The pattern's first stage, a trusted currency backed by real value, creating the foundation for imperial power and expansion. Emperor Nero, ruling from 54 to 68 AD, was the first to significantly reduce the silver content of the denarius. He needed to fund his lavish lifestyle and expensive military campaigns. So he ordered the mints to reduce the silver content from 100% to about 90%. That extra 10%? Pure profit for the emperor. He could mint 11 coins with the silver that used to make 10. More coins in circulation, same amount of silver. That's inflation. But here's the trap: 90% silver was still substantial. Most people didn't notice immediately. The coins looked the same. They had the emperor's face. They still said denarius. But the value had been diluted. This is the critical moment in every currency collapse. The first debasement seems small enough to get away with. And when there's no immediate consequence, it creates the illusion that you can do it again. So they did. By the time Emperor Caracalla ruled in 211 AD, about 150 years after Nero, the denarius was down to 50% silver. Half real value, half base metal. The government kept spending beyond its means. Kept fighting wars it couldn't afford. Kept expanding when it should have been consolidating. By 265 AD, under Emperor Gallienus, the denarius had fallen to just 5% silver. A coin that was once pure silver was now 95% worthless metal with a thin silver coating. Think about what that means. If you were a Roman soldier in 265 AD receiving your pay in denarii, you were being paid in coins worth 1/20th of what soldiers earned 2 centuries earlier. The government told you nothing had changed. The coin still said denarius. They still had the emperor's face. But the purchasing power had collapsed. And here's the key, this process took about 200 years. Long enough that each generation of leaders convinced themselves they were handling it, that they could manage the decline, that their situation was unique. They were wrong. The math always catches up. The pattern's second stage. Initial debasement seems manageable, creating false confidence that leads to accelerating debasement as spending pressures increase. When currency is debased, prices don't rise immediately. There's a lag, sometimes years or even decades, between the debasement and the inflation. This lag is what kills empires, because it convinces governments they can get away with it. But eventually, the market figures it out. What cost 1 denarius in 200 AD cost 50 denarii by 300 AD. A 50-fold increase in prices over a century. This wasn't gradual inflation. This was purchasing power destruction. Farmers stopped selling food for coins. Why would they? The coins lost value faster than they could spend them. They demanded barter instead, goods for goods, not goods for worthless metal. Soldiers refused to fight unless paid in gold or actual goods. You can't motivate an army with money that buys nothing. Military effectiveness collapsed not because Rome lacked men, but because it couldn't pay them in anything they valued. Tax collectors couldn't collect taxes. When the currency is worthless, citizens stop paying. They hide their real wealth, gold, silver, land, goods, and offer only the debased coins that nobody wants. The entire economic system seized up. Not because of external attack. Not because of plague. Because the medium of exchange, money itself, had been destroyed by the government that issued it. This created what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century, from 235 to 284 AD. Nearly 50 years of chaos. Invasions, yes. But invasions that succeeded because Rome couldn't fund defense. Civil wars, yes. But civil wars that happened because different factions fought over a collapsing system. In those 50 years, Rome had over 50 emperors. Most reigned for months before being assassinated. Why? Because whoever held power inherited an impossible situation, an empire with massive expenses and a worthless currency. Emperor Diocletian tried to stop the bleeding in 301 AD. He issued the edict on maximum prices, fixing the cost of over 1,000 goods and services by law. Violators faced death. It was a disaster. Prices can't be controlled by decree when the money itself is worthless. The black market exploded. Official trade collapsed. People learned that the law couldn't make a broken coin whole. The pattern's 3rd stage, inflation accelerates as the market recognizes debasement, destroying economic function and creating political instability. By the early 300s, Rome had effectively abandoned the denarius. Emperor Constantine introduced the solidus, a gold coin of consistent purity, around 312 AD. This restored some stability in the Eastern Roman Empire, which would survive as Byzantium for another 1,000 years. But the Western Empire was already dying. The damage was done. Here's what currency collapse does to an empire: you can't pay your armies. Roman legions that once defended borders from Britain to Mesopotamia were now understaffed, underpaid, and unmotivated. Soldiers deserted. Units dissolved. Borders became porous. You can't maintain infrastructure. The roads that connected the empire fell into disrepair. Aqueducts crumbled. Public buildings decayed. Not because Rome didn't know how to fix them, but because they couldn't pay workers in anything of value. You can't fund administration. The bureaucracy that managed 60 million people across 3 continents required payment. When payment became worthless, the administration collapsed. Tax collection failed. Law enforcement disappeared. Government ceased to function. By 476 AD, when the last Western Roman emperor was deposed, it was barely news. The empire had already collapsed decades earlier when its currency died. The barbarian invasions didn't destroy Rome, they just walked into a power vacuum created by economic suicide. The pattern's fourth stage, currency collapse, destroys the ability to fund military, infrastructure, and administration, causing total system failure. Now let's talk about the United States. Because the pattern isn't just historical. It's forming again. The US dollar has been the world's reserve currency since 1944. After World War II, the Bretton Woods system made the dollar the global standard, backed by gold at $35 per ounce. The dollar was as good as gold, literally. But just like Rome, the United States started spending more than it had. The Vietnam War. Great Society programs. Military bases in over 70 countries. By the 1960s, foreign governments noticed America was printing more dollars than it had gold to back them. France, under Charles de Gaulle, started demanding gold in exchange for dollars. Other nations followed. The gold was leaving Fort Knox. The bluff was being called. In 1971, President Nixon closed the gold window. No more gold backing. The dollar became a pure fiat currency, just like the debased Roman denarius. Backed by nothing but trust and the government's promise. At first, it seemed fine. The petrodollar system created artificial demand for dollars. But the spending never stopped. The debt kept growing. In 1980, U.S. national debt was $900 billion. By 2000, it was $5.6 trillion. By 2020, it was $27 trillion. Today, it's over $36 trillion. That's a 40-fold increase in 45 years. But the debt is only part of the story. Just like Rome debasing the denarius, the United States is printing money. Since 2008, the Federal Reserve has created trillions of dollars from nothing. During COVID, they printed over $4 trillion in 2 years. More money created than in the previous century combined. And just like every empire before, they told us it wouldn't cause inflation. That modern economics had solved the old problems. That we were different. We're not different. Inflation hit 9% in 2022. Real inflation, the prices you actually pay for food, housing, healthcare, is far higher. The dollar is being debased. Slowly at first, but the pattern always accelerates. And just like Rome losing trust across its empire, the United States is losing reserve currency status. In 2000, over 70% of global reserves were held in dollars. Today, it's 58% and falling. The BRICS nations are actively building alternatives. Central banks worldwide are buying gold and diversifying out of dollars. The world is preparing for the dollar to lose its dominance, just like they prepared for the Roman denarius to fail. The pattern's fifth stage. Modern empire following identical sequence of currency debasement, inflation, and loss of confidence. Let me show you the pattern clearly, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Stage 1, Dominance. The empire is at its peak. Military strength, economic power, currency trust. Rome with the denarius. America with the dollar. Stage 2, Overextension. The empire expands beyond its means. Rome across 3 continents. America with 800 military bases in over 70 countries. Stage 3. Deficit spending. The empire spends more than it earns. At first manageable through borrowing. Then structural and permanent. Rome needed to pay legions. America runs trillion-dollar deficits annually. Stage 4, Currency debasement. Can't borrow enough, can't tax enough, so debase the currency. Rome reduced silver content. America left gold in 1971 and has been printing ever since. Stage 5, Inflation. More currency, same amount of real goods means prices rise. Rome saw 50-fold price increases. America experiencing inflation now despite claims it's transitory. Stage 6, Loss of confidence. Population and foreign nations lose trust in the currency. Roman soldiers demanded gold, not denarii. The world is shifting away from the dollar. Stage 7, Collapse. The economic system fails. Currency becomes worthless or loses dominance. The empire can't fund its military or maintain control. Rome fell to tribes it could no longer pay to fight. America. That's the question we're living through. 7 stages. Repeated across 2,000 years. Different empires, different continents, different currencies. But the exact same sequence. Because the math doesn't change. You cannot spend more than you earn forever. You cannot print prosperity. And you cannot debase your currency without consequences. So what actually protects wealth when currency fails? Rome teaches us specific lessons. First, those who held real assets survived. Land, if you could defend it and pay taxes. Gold and silver, the actual metal, not the debased coins. These held value when paper promises failed. Second, those with skills that didn't depend on currency. The farmer who could grow food, the craftsman who could make tools, the builder who could construct, these people had value regardless of what happened to money. They could barter their production for what they needed. Third, those who understood the pattern early and positioned themselves accordingly. The wealthy Romans who converted denarii into land and gold before the final collapse. The ones who saw what was coming and acted while there was still time. What didn't survive? Savings held in debased currency. Pensions paid in worthless coins. Government bonds. Anything that was a promise denominated in the failing currency evaporated. The lesson isn't to panic. It's to recognize that currency, all currency, is simply a shared belief. When that belief breaks, you want to hold things that have value independent of belief. Real assets. Real skills. Real production capacity. Rome teaches us that empires don't collapse from outside. They collapse from within, through the systematic destruction of their own money. And when the money dies, everything built on that money dies with it. Rome didn't fall because Germanic tribes were stronger. Rome fell because Rome couldn't pay its armies anymore. Couldn't fund its administration. Couldn't maintain its infrastructure. The currency had been debased into irrelevance, and everything built on that currency collapsed. The denarius went from 100% silver to 5% silver over about 200 years. Slow enough that each generation thought they could manage it. Fast enough that by the time they realized they couldn't, it was too late. The pattern is absolute. Military overextension, unsustainable spending, currency debasement, inflation, loss of confidence, collapse. Rome proved it. Spain proved it after finding endless silver in the New World. Britain proved it after 2 world wars. And the United States is proving it right now. The national debt is $36 trillion and growing by over $2 trillion per year. Interest payments alone exceed $1.2 trillion annually. The Federal Reserve has printed trillions. The dollar has lost reserve currency status from 70% to 58% and falling. We're in stage 5 or 6 of a 7-stage collapse pattern. The only variables are timing and severity. Rome took 200 years to fully collapse. Modern economies move faster. Much faster. The question isn't whether the pattern applies. History proves it does. The question is whether you'll recognize it while there's still time to position yourself accordingly. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe. History has the answers, I'll show you where to look.